Not all pain cries out loud. Some turn into silence, others into hidden strength. Many people learn to appear fine just so they don't burden others. But behind that composure, behind the distance and the extreme independence, there's always a story. Carl Jung warned us, when pain is not understood, it hides and reappears as behavior. The hardest part? Almost no one notices. They just judge. In this video, you'll discover the 13 hidden traits of people who have suffered deeply and why they act so differently, sometimes even surprising themselves. More importantly, you'll learn how to turn this silent pain into awareness, choice, and healing. Stay with me until the end, because this may change the way you see yourself and the people you care about. Some scars leave no marks on the body, but they show up in subtle ways. In someone's eyes, in how long it takes them to trust, in the sudden need to disappear even while surrounded by others. Some wounds are invisible, yet they shape everything inside. Quietly, they transform how someone lives. Old pain doesn't announce itself. It becomes a way of being. It turns into silence, where there should be words, into stiffness where there once was openness. Sometimes the person doesn't even realize they're carrying something. They only feel tired, like everything takes more effort than it should, like life always feels heavier for no clear reason. Carl Jung described trauma as a psychic wound that, when ignored, continues to bleed within. Yet he also said that this wound can become a passage, not to erase what hurt, but to transform what still feels like a threat. When pain is truly acknowledged, it doesn't remain a sentence, it becomes awareness. But here's the problem. Almost no one teaches us how to listen to pain. The world demands performance, not reflection. And so those who've endured too much learn to survive. They put on masks, build emotional shortcuts, and hide. They keep living, even smiling, but inside they remain on high alert, as if one wrong move could reopen what barely managed to heal. You may see yourself in many of these traits, or you may think of someone you love who suddenly makes more sense. Either way, what matters is not to analyze anyone, but to approach with empathy, with presence, and above all, without guilt. Every behavior carries a story. No trait comes from nowhere. So if at any point during this video you feel a lump in your throat or the need to take a deeper breath, don't be surprised. It's just your soul recognizing a part of itself. And that recognition, simple as it may seem, is already a step toward healing. Some people learned early that depending on others is dangerous, that asking for help leads to pain, that relying on someone risks humiliation or abandonment. As a defense, the psyche built a solution. They became everything for themselves, strong, decisive, seemingly unbreakable, but inside, exhausted. Carl Jung described the false self as an ego structure built for survival when showing one's true self feels unsafe. It does protect, but it also isolates. These individuals grow used to carrying everything alone. And without realizing it, the world begins to believe they can truly handle it all. But no one should bear everything alone. That's why the first hidden trait of those who've suffered too much is the armor of hyper-independence. It looks like strength, but it's actually an old scar. Impressive from a distance, yet heavy within. They refuse to show pain, but feel it. They refuse to ask for comfort, but still need it. They just don't know how to anymore, or they're ashamed, or can't remember what it feels like to trust without fear. This rigidity seeps into relationships, friendships, and work. Life turns into performance. Everything becomes self-control. But there's a cost. The chest feels tight, touch feels threatening, rest feels like weakness. And even surrounded by people, they feel alone. Hyper-independence is not freedom. It's a prison with an internal lock. These individuals don't want to be a burden. They just want to ensure they'll never be abandoned again. Yet deep down, it's still a silent wound. The second hidden trait is excessive empathy. At first, it looks like a virtue, and often it is. But when empathy turns into a survival mechanism, it stops being just a gift and becomes a coping strategy. From childhood, some people learn to scan the room like they're searching for shelter. They can sense when something is about to go wrong. They notice a shift in tone, a glance, a silence. Their sensitivity grows so sharp that without realizing it, they begin to feel for others before they even know how to recognize their own feelings. This kind of empathy doesn't grow from light. It comes from necessity, from fearing the anger of an unstable father, from anticipating a mother's sudden outburst, from carrying the burden of keeping peace at home, even at the cost of their own childhood. Jung called projection the unconscious act of placing onto others what we have not yet dared to see within ourselves. Often, this is what happens to those who feel too deeply for others. Without realizing it, they try to heal in others the pain they have avoided in themselves. They become the constant supporter, the one people turn to for advice, the reliable presence. Yet behind all that giving hides an exhaustion, because those who carry everyone's emotions often forget about their own. Too much empathy may appear noble, and sometimes it is, but it can also become a way to escape, a method to avoid facing personal wounds. It becomes easier to exist for others than to exist for oneself. This imbalance can lead to relationships where one only gives while the other only takes, where listening to others replaces listening to yourself. Slowly, sensitivity turns into overload. People with this trait often feel invisible when they are not being useful. That is the clearest sign that empathy has shifted from genuine love into a defense mechanism. Deep down, this pattern has a reason. Once long ago, anticipating emotions was necessary for survival. But today, it is no longer required. Perhaps the greatest act of empathy now is directing that same care inward. Some people love in fragments. Not because they lack feelings, they feel intensely, but because they hold back, they observe, analyze every detail, and even when they begin to trust, part of them always remains hidden. A part that doubts, a voice inside warns, be careful, this might hurt again. And it could. For someone who was wounded where they most needed safety, opening up is no longer simple. The memory of abandonment is louder than present affection. Love arrives, but fear arrives with it. This is the third trait of those who have suffered deeply, fear of true relationships. Intimacy reactivates old alarms. It is not exaggeration. It is the unconscious recognizing patterns that left deep scars. Jung described how unconscious complexes can take over awareness. In relationships, this shows as overreactions, jealousy, that seems irrational or sudden withdrawal. Beneath it all is often an inner child who remembers how much it hurt to trust and then be abandoned. On the surface, this person may seem confident, even self-reliant. They may say, "I don't need anyone," or "I'm better off alone." But inside lies a buried longing. Each time someone gets too close, it resurfaces as fear, irritability, control, or silence. True relationships require presence. But for someone who has endured this, being fully present feels unsafe. Love turns into conflict instead of refuge. If you love someone like this, patience is needed. And if you see yourself here, courage is needed. Not to dive recklessly into love, but to recognize that the present does not have to repeat the past. Not all love wounds. Not every approach hides abandonment. Sometimes it is simply someone choosing to stay. How many times have you heard this? You're so strong, and you smile, say thank you, and nod, but no one knows that at night you cried yourself to sleep. Again. Some people became symbols of strength because they had no other choice. When the world collapsed too early, they either held the roof up with their own hands or collapsed beneath it. So the body learned to rise each day, even when inside it wanted to disappear. The fourth trait of those who have endured too much is this: the mask of strength that breaks in private. The appearance is steady, the voice confident, the gaze firm. Yet behind it lies an exhaustion unseen. Showing tiredness feels like weakness. Showing pain feels impossible. Jung called this the persona, the social mask we all wear. But when suffering is immense, the mask becomes permanent. The person becomes who the world needs, forgetting who they truly are. The danger is that this strength becomes a silent prison. No one asks if you need help, because everyone assumes you are fine. But no one can carry everything endlessly. What looks like balance may only be containment. What looks like control may be fear of falling apart in front of others. Life then becomes an act of holding everything together on the outside while slowly breaking within. And when the breakdown arrives, it happens alone. In the shower, on the pillow, on the way home. No one notices, no one suspects, because the performance was perfect. But it has been too heavy for too long. Real strength is not about never falling. It is about admitting today is hard and trusting that someone will listen without judgment, advice, or pressure. Just listen. Maybe that is when the armor begins to loosen. The fifth trait of those who have suffered too much is heightened sensitivity. Loud sounds overwhelm, bright lights irritate, crowds drain energy. The mind tries to stay calm, but the body reacts first. The heart races, breathing shortens, and the urge to escape rises without a clear cause. This is not exaggeration. It is the nervous system living in constant alert. Behind this hypersensitivity lies a history, a childhood where danger came without warning, or a trauma that made the world unsafe, a body that never learned to relax. When pain is constant, the body remembers. Jung said, what does not reach consciousness returns as fate. Old pain returns as physical reactions. The body speaks what the soul has not expressed. This sensitivity makes someone notice what others ignore, a sound that feels harsh, a smell unnoticed by others, a glance that feels like judgment. It is like living with all senses switched on, even when no danger is present. It is exhausting and often misunderstood by those around. Why does a simple conversation sometimes leave someone completely drained? For highly sensitive individuals, every word and gesture feels amplified. This sensitivity can be a gift when understood. It makes a person intuitive, perceptive, and deeply aware. But when rooted in trauma, it turns into a burden. The body becomes a quiet battlefield, reacting to threats the conscious mind has long forgotten, but the soul still remembers. Healing begins when we recognize how pain shapes the body. Discomfort isn't weakness, it is memory. An intense reaction to something small may just be an old cry asking to be heard. Not all discomfort is random. Often, it is the body's way of saying, it was too much for me once, and now I'm trying to protect you. The sixth trait of those who have suffered deeply is an obsessive need for control. This isn't about being bossy or rigid. It begins when life once felt overwhelmingly chaotic and survival meant controlling every detail. Control became a way to breathe, planning ahead, anticipating outcomes, double and triple checking. It isn't about power, it's about fear. Fear of being blindsided again. Fear of reliving pain that once felt unbearable. On the outside, it may look like efficiency, responsibility, and discipline. But inside, it is constant tension. Even when nothing is wrong, the mind races. What if something goes wrong? What if I forgot something? Jung once said, the ego tries to control exactly what the unconscious doesn't want to face. In this case, control becomes a shield against life's unpredictability and against the helplessness that once consumed the soul. People, locked in this mode, struggle to rest. They dislike delegating. They resist the unexpected. To them, surprises are not small inconveniences. They feel like threats. They disrupt more than schedules. They shake the psyche. Without realizing it, Many live trapped in this cycle, always tired, always responsible, always fixing, even when no one asked them to. But this comes with a cost. Relationships grow tense. Small decisions feel overwhelming. The present is never enough because the mind is always 2 steps ahead. At its core, this obsession with control is not strength. It's the mark of a soul that once felt powerless against pain and now compensates by holding too tightly. Yet life, wild and mysterious, cannot be controlled. It can only be lived. And living requires trust. Not blind trust, but a small opening. The belief that not everything needs to be controlled for things to work out. Healing doesn't come from dropping control all at once. It begins by realizing step by step that it is possible to exist without fearing collapse. Letting go feels like turning off the lights in a room where you once slept with every lamp on because of fear. At first, it's unsettling. Then slowly it becomes rest. True rest, however, doesn't always come from people or conversation. Sometimes relief comes when everything quiets down, when the world stops pressing, demanding, or touching. This is the 7th trait of those who have suffered too much. Silence as refuge. Silence isn't isolation from disdain. It's a need. For space, a pause, a chance to breathe without intrusion. It becomes shelter, a cocoon where the soul reorganizes itself. This can be difficult for those who thrive on noise, movement, and company. They may not understand why someone prefers a quiet corner, a shorter conversation, or a lighter presence. But for those who have endured inner storms, silence is not emptiness, it is repair. Jung recognized the symbolic meaning of retreat, describing withdrawal as a psychic death and rebirth. When everything feels overwhelming, the soul pulls back, not out of coldness, but for survival. Silence is not just the absence of sound, it's the absence of judgment, demands, and masks. It is a space where pain can simply exist without explanation, without the pressure to heal quickly. But silence, if left unchecked, can harden into a wall. What began as rest can become isolation, and isolation can drift into forgetfulness. That's why silence requires care. Not everyone who withdraws is fine. Sometimes they are simply too exhausted to keep trying in a world that never stops talking. The way forward is to allow silence without guilt, without constant explanations, but also to recognize when to open the door, even just slightly, to let in someone who listens and stays. Silence can feel like home, but even home needs a door. This brings us to the 8th trait, a heart that is overly guarded. Saying, "I trust you," may sound simple, but for someone who has been betrayed while trusting, those words feel impossibly heavy. The gesture sticks in the throat, the emotion freezes in the body, not because love or trust is absent, but because the risk feels too great. The ego has learned to protect itself, building invisible filters, evaluating everything before believing. It hesitates before surrendering. It studies every gesture, every tone of voice, even the pauses between one message and the next. Love may arrive, but it must pass through a demanding filter before being accepted. And this process is draining. 4. Both the one who feels and the one trying to offer love, because affection never flows freely. There's always hidden tension, always the question, can I truly trust this? The soul remains half awake, never fully resting. Jung spoke of the difference between living in fear and living in trust. In this case, fear becomes the lens through which everything is seen. Life is filtered through memories of pain. Even when circumstances are good, an inner voice whispers, "Be careful. This could change." It is as if the unconscious doesn't recognize that time has passed. It still reacts as though the danger is present. Even when kindness and presence are real, distrust surfaces as a shield against hurt. Yet this shield also prevents love from being fully experienced. True connection requires some form of surrender, Some willingness to take the risk of opening the door. Ironically, those who protect their hearts the most are often the ones who desire love most deeply. They long to give and receive it, but fear reliving the same pain. Protection becomes their survival strategy. Yet overprotection brings its own suffering. The answer may lie in small steps, testing trust slowly, allowing space for something new to unfold, not opening everything at once, but not running away either. Because perhaps this time, love has not come to wound, but to stay. The ninth trait of those who've suffered deeply is a sharpened sense of justice, born from pain. This does not come from books or theories, but from lived experience. Betrayal, silence, helplessness, the absence of protection. A soul crushed by injustice develops the ability to detect it instantly and refuses to accept it again. Even minor disrespect can trigger an old alarm. The reaction is both defense and memory. Jung explained that emotional complexes are activated when the present touches the same wound created in the past. A sharpened sense of justice is one of those wounds. It belongs to those who once were silenced, but now refuse to remain quiet. Others may dismiss them as dramatic, impulsive, or extreme, but what is really happening is the psyche declaring, "Not this time, I won't remain silent." This sensitivity often appears early. Children who saw wrongs they couldn't stop, teenagers who rebelled against unfair rules, adults who defend causes with the intensity of protecting their younger selves. The archetype that emerges here is the moral warrior, fighting not for perfection, but for dignity, respect, and coherence. When balanced, this fight is noble, but when driven only by pain, it can harden into rigidity and intolerance. The challenge is to carry this sense of justice without letting it become an unyielding shield, to know when to fight, when to listen, when to lower the sword. Those who have been wounded by injustice understand the damage it causes, and precisely because of this, they hold the rare opportunity to respond differently, to protect without punishing, to fight without being consumed by the war. Those who carry this sword of justice know a truth many overlook: pain sharpens perception. It doesn't only recognize injustice, it notices the invisible. Those who have suffered too much develop a radar for hidden pain, even when cloaked in silence. Their gaze cuts through not by what is spoken, but by what is silently perceived. They sense when someone's smile conceals struggle, when unspoken words weigh heavily, when silence hides sorrow. This is the 10th trait of those who've suffered greatly: the ability to perceive the unseen in others. Pain fine-tunes their senses, making the soul more alert, empathetic, and attuned to hidden sadness. This isn't magic, it is memory. Memory of living through what they now detect in subtle signs. This perception cannot be taught. It is awakened through suffering. Those who have cried in silence learn to hear silence. Those who felt alone in a crowd recognize that loneliness in others. Jung observed that by integrating our own pain, we grow capable of recognizing collective pain. This is exactly what this trait represents: an emotional radar that does not seek attention but emerges when needed, often making all the difference. This heightened sensitivity may seem gentle, but it carries weight. Seeing what others miss is also a responsibility. Often, those who feel so deeply for others neglect themselves. They absorb, they carry, they disappear into the needs of others. The key is balance, being present without losing oneself, feeling with others without carrying everything alone. This ability to perceive the invisible is both gift and reminder. Pain, when processed with awareness, becomes a tool, a presence that comforts without invading, a touch that supports without controlling. Even in a world that rushes past, those with this gift know that truth is found in the smallest details, in how someone sits, in the pause between words, in the unconvincing "I'm fine" Yet this clarity comes at a cost. While noticing gestures, tones, and unspoken truths, a voice inside often asks, what if in the end you're just a burden? And sometimes this leads to unnecessary apologies, for little things, or for nothing at all. Have you ever felt that simply existing, just taking up space, was already too much? The 11th trait of those who have endured deep suffering is this: the fear of being a burden. It's a quiet but constant feeling, a silent shame for having needs, desires, or pain. Those who carry this fear rarely speak of it, yet it shows in the way they shrink themselves, in every "I'm okay" said to avoid worrying others, in the tears they swallow so no one sees them as weak. This fear often begins in childhood, when emotional pain was ignored or treated as a nuisance. Children who were told, "Stop crying, don't be dramatic," or made to feel unimportant grow up believing that their feelings are a problem and that they themselves are inconvenient. As adults, they often become kind, responsible, and helpful, but quietly afraid of being too much. They feel guilty for asking for help, guilty for taking up space in moments of weakness, as if they must constantly compensate for simply existing. Carl Jung called this unconscious guilt, a wound, so deep that the ego forms itself around it. The message becomes, you only have value if you stay out of the way. Such people learn to justify their presence, to minimize their needs, even to feel uncomfortable when receiving love, as if it belongs to someone more deserving. Living like this is like walking while afraid to leave footprints, existing as if needing permission just to breathe. But no one should feel guilty for needing. To need is human, to be tired is human, to be vulnerable is human too. Recognizing this fear is already part of healing, because when you understand that taking up space isn't an offense but a right, something changes. The weight lifts, the soul stands taller. Life no longer feels like an endless effort to avoid troubling others. You don't have to earn love or explain your existence. Being here is enough. And even within this fear of being a burden, the soul still finds comfort in small, unnoticed details, the warmth of coffee in your hands, a good morning when you least expect it. Those who have lost much learn to treasure the smallest things, and this is where healing begins. A late afternoon light through the window, a simple "Did you get home safe?" message, the sound of rain outside while the world keeps moving. The 12th trait of those who have suffered deeply is the ability to appreciate life's small moments. This is not romanticizing pain, it is what remains after pain has passed. When everything feels like it is falling apart, the simple things gain new meaning. The small no longer feels small. It becomes a reminder of peace and presence. Those who have been broken learn to see beauty where others do not. The soul develops a quiet gratitude, not for the suffering, but for what followed, for the pause, for unexpected kindness, for the stability that once felt impossible. Jung spoke of the archetype of the wise one, someone who, after facing their shadow, returns with new vision, more humble, more present. That is what happens here. They don't need much to feel, but when they do, they feel deeply. This sensitivity shows in little ways, in a smile at the changing colors of the sky, in true gratitude for a cup of coffee, in tears at a song that touches an old wound. This is not fragility but depth. It is emotional maturity. It is surviving chaos and still choosing tenderness. The ability to appreciate small things belongs to those who know the cost of loss and now see value before it disappears. It's a presence that listens in silence, a look that gives thanks even before asking. And the final trait of those who have suffered greatly is the search for purpose after pain. Survival alone is not enough. The soul longs to understand why, to turn pain into meaning, to give direction to what once felt like devastation. After hardship, many begin searching for something greater than themselves, a reason to keep moving forward, a way to ensure it wasn't all in vain. This purpose may not be grand, but it is genuine. It might mean helping someone else through a similar struggle, creating something new, writing, teaching, healing, or simply being there for another person in a way no one once was for them. Pain seeks to become path. Jung called this the beginning of individuation, when a person is no longer a prisoner of their past, but begins to transform it into awareness, purpose, and offering. This shift shows in how they live, less concerned with appearances, more connected to truth. They know life is short and fragile, so they make it meaningful. Even unbearable moments gain new purpose. This doesn't erase the pain, it remains as memory, as scar. But instead of controlling them, it now guides them. Looking back, they realize that even while broken, they kept moving. Even wounded, they still cared. They turned suffering into presence and presence into purpose. It isn't about being a role model or appearing strong. It's about slowly moving beyond survival into intentional living. This search for purpose is not escape, but growth. The birth of something new in the soul. Something that says, I went through it, but that's not all I am. From this place, life begins to bloom again. You are not your pain, and you don't have to hide it. There is strength in survival, a quiet wisdom formed in the hidden spaces of the soul without applause or recognition. Every trait we've discussed is proof of that, evidence of how you kept going when everything inside you wanted to stop. Some of these traits became shields, others compasses, some became heavy, others became gifts. But all of them were born to protect something precious within you. Carl Jung said, the tree that reaches to heaven must have roots that reach down to hell. And that is the truth. Everything you have grown into is shaped by what you have endured. You are not wrong for carrying these marks. You are alive, and that life, after all you've been through, is a strength rarely seen but deeply real. This doesn't mean everything is healed, or that life will suddenly fall into place. But maybe, for the first time, you can look with more kindness at the parts of yourself you once hated, because even they were trying to protect you. You no longer need to hide or stay on guard. The pain that shaped you doesn't have to lead anymore. It can walk quietly beside you. And with more awareness, more freedom, you can see that what once looked like weakness was simply your way of not giving up. You kept going, and that speaks volumes. If this video resonated with you, if you saw yourself in these traits or thought of someone who carries them, consider subscribing. Here we continue exploring these deep paths of the psyche, pain, and healing, with honesty and respect. And if you've stayed with me until the very end, leave this phrase in the comments. My pain taught me too. It might remind someone, else they're not alone. See you in the next video. Take care. You truly deserve it.